I want to get back to this like problem solving. You and I were working on this large painting. For years, you had been advocating for me to start painting larger, and I just was not ready. I had something to prove. Like, I wanted to prove that I was a good drafts person, that I was a good crafts person. I wanted to know the craft better. And then one day you were like, it's time. Mm-hmm. And you drove over a 5-foot canvas and you're like,
strapped it to the roof of the car.
Let's go. Yeah. And so we're now into, like, I believe our 5th or 6th very large painting. And it seems so natural now. Now, that being said, we started out with this theme. I was like, I want to do bees. I just have this affinity for bees. I now know why, but I didn't then. And so, we spent probably 4 months on this bee project, this 5-foot by 4-foot bee painting. And that at some point, I wanted to take a knife and cut the canvas in shreds. Like, I couldn't find what I was looking for. And every time I was in the conversation with the darn painting, it was lying to me. It was telling me all kinds of stories. Mm-hmm. And so, like, you were like, okay, like, I was ready to throw the canvas out. And you were like, no, like, just take some paint and cover the whole canvas. And you were like, you might want to preserve these 3 bees. And then what I was struggling with for like 4 or 5 months suddenly became this painting that, like, everybody's responding to. Mm-hmm. Everybody's going like, wow, what is that? How did that happen? It's the and you gave me some beautiful ideas. Like, so I'm interested, like, both as a process and a metaphor for, like, being stuck and like problem solving that stuckness when it's like, I think, I don't play golf, but I can imagine that there's some people, I know there are some people out there that get so frustrated that they wrap their golf club around a tree. Mm-hmm. Like, they just smash the damn thing. Like, and that's the feeling I had, and you got me out of this really dark place, and like, the darn thing just happened.
Yeah. Well, you found it by destroying it.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. And I think there's that frustration and that what did you say? The painting was lying to you? Like, you're having a conversation, but it was lying to you. I mean, it's an interesting, kind of metaphor. Like,
it was telling me stories.
Was it lying to you, or were you not ready to hear the truth? Which was, this isn't working.
Right.
You need to do something. But you had spent months working on it and putting all of this, like, time and energy and, making changes, and it's not working. And that can be really defeating and really hard, but you can let it go. You can cut it to shreds. You can throw it in the trash. You can completely paint over it. But I was like, there are moments in this painting that I think are really successful. And maybe it just needs, you need to let go of that, that initial idea that you were holding on to so tightly. Right. How can I think of what it was? There again, this, like, painter that I worked with really closely, who was like a mentor to me, what he said, conception can't precede execution.
Conception cannot precede execution.
Yeah, I think that's what it was, or I'm paraphrasing, but it basically, like, you can only understand and know what this thing is going to be to a certain extent until you begin making it. And then it's going to go in whatever direction it's going to go.
This thing, what you just said, is such a brilliant metaphor for what's been going on in my life. Mm. Like, I've been holding on to relationships and partnerships and all these things. And I put all this work in and all this stuff, and I just had to let it go. And that's what this painting was about for me. And you came up with this beautiful idea. You were like, make it a self-portrait. Mm-hmm. And I was like, damn it. Like, that's it. Like, and and the bees, and this whole thing got revealed to me because the angst that was going on in my life, and the bees, there are 3 bees left, and each of those bees represents one of my work, one of my schools.
Mm.
And I only realized that when I was looking at the darn thing as I'm painted on it. And it's telling me like, oh, this, like, and I told my sister, like, she's like, there's so much in this. And I'm like, yeah, it commemorates this moment in my life. And I now know that the bees represent work.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand that until I had to let the whole damn thing go. And then it just revealed itself. And the amazing thing to me, and I'll be interested to know if you experienced that, is that when you let it go, the right idea is like almost effortless.
Mm-hmm.
It almost just paints itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I have like 3 canvases in the studio right now that are all, I wouldn't say failed, but abandoned. You know, they weren't coming to fruition in a way that was exciting to me, or I got, sidetracked, or I started on something new.
It's so interesting that we have this attachment even to, like, we abandon them.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're ours, but we let, yeah, it's just so fascinating.
I didn't cast it out into the street. It's still there. Maybe some of them I turned away from because I didn't want to look at them, but I was like, I'm gonna make something out of these. Before I start any new big, large scale painting, like I'm tackling these 3 or 4 pieces. And it's just this very process we're talking about. I'm okay, that's not working. Just like grab some color, throw a wash over it, start editing, start making those big moves, and then just let instinct kind of take it.
Is it instinct or is it intuition?
Yeah, intuition.
Yeah,
maybe that's a better word.
Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
And now I'm obsessed, and at least with one of them.
Yeah.
And I'm plugging away at it every day.
Yeah.
And seeing
your eyes just got brighter, man.
I gotta go paint. Sorry. But yeah, and I lose my train of thought here. But part of that, that consistency and that working every day, I'm so excited. Like I go to bed and like I'm excited about waking up in the morning and coming back to it.
Nice.
And this is one of the biggest gifts that I've given myself by leaving this job and taking the sleep is I can get up in the morning, I can sip my coffee, I can maybe like read a chapter of the book, sit in the studio, be looking, and before anything in the world around me has gotten in my head or thrown me off track, I can just get to work painting. And it's brilliant.
Casey, why landscape? Why not figurative work? Why not abstract? Abstract expressionism?
I've tried all of these things as an art student, figuring it out, learning to paint. And I think there's a number of different reasons. One was environmental in terms of my environment when I was learning to paint. In college, I was out in Colorado.
Yes.
So I was surrounded by
nature.
By nature. It was a place for me to go that grounded me.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no. That I felt and feel a strong connection to, and it was just like the right language through which to communicate for me.
Did you grow up in nature?
I grew up, I would like played in the woods.
Yeah.
As a kid. It was rural suburb kind of place. But I had that time. There were state parks, places, me and my friends would go walk through the woods.
Right.
I always enjoyed getting up to the mountains. And I also, concurrently with just being surrounded by that, one of my initial professors who I really clicked with was a landscape painter.
Right.
And I just found myself so drawn to that. And this, world building and creating these spaces And I found that I could, whatever content I wanted to get across, whether that was psychological or political or environmental, whatever it was, I found that I could embed that in the landscape,
Uh-huh.
in a way that a figure didn't serve. Or, I mean, abstraction interests me a lot.
Yeah.
My work does veer into abstraction, but it's still
It has a
always,
context, right?
it's still landscape.
Yeah, right.
It's
right.
still a space, and it's
Right.
about the light and the atmosphere, and something that you can enter into, but in some cases, something that also keeps you out.
Uh-huh.
When I talk about, like, when I'm inventing a picture and I'm letting the forms present themselves. But then if it's a more abstract approach, it's about not making things nameable, right? It's like, oh, that kind of feels like it could be a mountain, or that
Right.
feels like it could, it indicates some sort of distance or
Right.
light, but it's
Right.
not. You can't grasp it.
Right.
You can't put a label on it.
My friend interviewed Julian Schnabel
Mm.
and was struck by something that he had said. I probably am paraphrasing, but one of the most important things an artist can do is find his own or her own language.
Mm.
And so I found it very fascinating that you said it was like a language that worked for you.
I think at a certain point, I kind of internalized nature,
Uh-huh.
and it's just what I just see it. I can begin with just marks,
Right.
and chasing the color around, looking for those moments that describe a certain light.
I just got a visual of a little you running inside the canvas with a brush chasing the color. Come back. Sorry.
Feels like that sometimes.
Yeah, go ahead.
What was I saying?
We were talking about finding your own language.
Yeah. And I think you have to find what your hand does naturally.
Not your eye.
It's a connection.
It's the same.
They're like inextricable.
Mm.
Your hand becomes just an extension.
There's so many parallels in martial arts. I
I don't believe it.
remember training with a guy who was like the all African champion. He was tiny, man, but he was a killer. And he said to me one time, he said, "My goal is for my hands and feet to have eyes." Like his conscious mind his conscious mind was slower than his actual technique, his actual kick and punch. And I just watched him annihilate people. Like, he was so effective. And that forethought, that like insight, so deep, and such a parallel right there.
Absolutely.
So Casey, like, what do you imagine for yourself, like, or for the art? Do you think about what the future, so for instance, like, we're finishing up this self-portrait, and I'm now thinking like, oh, I can imagine myself doing multi-figure large paintings in a very similar way. It inspired some new thought, right? It's inspired a completely new direction, right? And so I'm starting to imagine this new dimension for myself. And since you're kind of all in, if you will, do you have any thought about what next, like
what the work will look like?
Yeah. Are you
too many to tackle at once?
Fair enough.
There have been things that I've stumbled across in the past, 10, 15 years of painting that I feel like I didn't have the ability to fully follow through on, or chase it to whatever end it was going to find. So it might be coming back to some of those things. And maybe they intermingle and they
Right.
cross paths. I mean, I think,
Right.
in talking about how, sometimes the work veers into abstraction,
Right.
but for me, it's all kind of the same. Like it all sits under the same umbrella, but there are these kind of parallel tracks that every now and then start to like intersect or bump
Uh-huh.
into one another,
Uh-huh.
and something from over here will creep over here.
Uh-huh.
Like I did around like 2010 to 2012. I found all of this metal, sheets
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
tin, eroded metal, right? And it had like been torn off the building. I live in this 1880s
The garbage in New
brownstone.
York City is a plethora
Yeah.
of material.
So there was this pile of metal sitting out on my rooftop, and I'm like, grumbling. I'm out there. I'm like cleaning it up. And then you flash forward 20 minutes, and I've got it laid out across the whole roof. And I'm like, this looks like my work. Like there would be a horizon line eroded into the
Wow.
metal. The colors, you'll get oranges
Yeah, yep,
and
yep.
all these different colors that felt like it was light, it was atmosphere, it was
Yeah.
all these things. So I started making these sort of found object paintings. I still call them paintings, and some of them I did actually paint into
Yeah.
around, because there were a whole section of the metal would be eroded away, and I'd glue what was left onto a panel and paint, and mimicking those colors and textures, and sometimes
Fascinating.
painting over the metal. And that opened up, I think that was one of the initial avenues for me into a more abstract approach. And that's something that I'd love to revisit, whether it's working with other materials like that. Potentially at some point, maybe I started being more sculptural.
Right.
That might be tough in my Brooklyn apartment, but there's so many opportunities to come back to, like that was that felt like a specific language.
I think it's so interesting. My brother, the physicist, used to say it's so nonlinear. These things kind of informing one another from our past, our present, and they're kind of commingling to form something new that we never could have imagined. Who's your favorite, or like who's the most important landscape artist for you, and kind of why?
Couldn't name one.
Not Bierstadt.
I love some Bierstadt. But lately, like out of those Hudson River School painters, who I were definitely.
That's why I keep thinking about the Hudson School as you're talking about your painting, because it's so atmospheric, it's so deep, it's very vast.
Well, that was an initial fascination for me too. That the American wing at the Met.
Yeah.
I'd go sit in front of these epic landscape paintings.
Yeah.
And get lost for hours.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do that. I was like, I want to be able to do that. But in terms of that school of painters, I looked a lot at Frederick Church. More recently, though, like Thomas Moran is another one, because his paint handling and his surfaces, they're very painterly. Whereas like a Bierstadt or a Church, they're beautiful paintings, but they're a little tighter. They're a little more
not over-rendered, but they're more rendered. Is that what you mean by tighter?
Yeah. And the Moran, when I got up, I think I saw some of his paintings at in DC at the National Gallery. And they're huge. But you could get up close, and you just looking at the way the paint is sliding together, and you could tell he was like knifing it on there, and you step back and it all coalesces into something very detailed and very rendered, but it's all just chunks of paint.
You say that to me all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to work up close, and it's got to work far back as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, that's in terms of that school of painters. I really have been loving his work and spending more time with that. Anselm Kiefer is a big one that I started thinking more about in terms of being an influence to my own work when I was making these metal paintings.
Right.
He uses chunks of lead and earth and all sorts of crap in his paintings. Tar. But they have that. They're in conversation with those these landscape paintings, these like historical landscape
Right.
paintings, in terms of their scale,
Right.
in terms of these ideas of the sublime in nature, and how you're approaching that. His paintings are much darker. They're more psychological. But in terms of the materiality of it, they really interest me.
We talk a lot about, and we'll kind of conclude with this, but we talk a lot about having a historical relationship, that we're part of the overall conversation of, in our case, oil painting, and what that means. And we've started paintings. The bee painting, for instance, was modeled after a classic Baroque painting, and it tickled me to no end that underneath all of this was a kind of homage, or a line, a direct line, a rope, a connection to the historical depth of art on the planet Earth, in the history of the planet Earth.
Yeah. And it's in there. It's embedded.
It's
buried.
It's buried
in your painting, and it's part of that. As like we've talked about this, like Vincent Desiderio's painter, contemporary painter, talks about this idea of a technical narrative.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, even if there's only glimpses of that, still,
it's still in there.
It's still in there.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone would come up to that painting and be like, "Oh, this was clearly inspired by," but it's part of the story of that painting, and you wouldn't have gotten to where you are without that starting point.
What does that mean to you? Like, are you thinking? Are you thinking like, okay, this is the next rung on the historic ladder? Or are you thinking like, is there a responsibility to painting that you feel to push it into the future? Like, what does it mean for you to have a connection like that, right? You can name any painter, Rembrandt, or, not even landscape, but these, it's all there. It's all oil on canvas. What does that mean for you?
I don't know. It adds, it brings a particular context to the work. You can't make a painting in general, but for me, like, you can't make a landscape painting without the acknowledgement of everything that's come before you, and also everything that's happening in the current moment. So it informs the work, sometimes directly, where I will put historical reference into, I'll put a Bierstadt moment in a painting, and then I'll set it on fire. But it also, I think that, keeping that in mind helps me to push, right? To not let the work feel too safe, or too
because
repetitive.
Those guys pushed. Is that what you mean?
In their own way.
Yeah.
I think it's a different, since modern art. There's a different outlook. There used to be this, continuation of a school, and people worked under a master, and they painted in that style, but then they found their own mark, their own language, however subtle or extreme that might be. But I think you have to keep that conversation in mind, because I can't be Frederick Church. I can't be Anselm Kiefer.
I can't be Max Ginsberg or Casey Inch.
Right. So you study, and I studied under a landscape painter and also an abstract painter whose work veered in, was kind of landscape, but they taught me a lot about, different ways of being critical in terms of looking at your own work. One of them said at some point, he was like, he came into my studio and was looking at what I was doing, and he just kind of looked around and he didn't say anything for like 5 minutes. And he's like, I'm going to say one thing and then I'm going to walk out the door. And this is going to sound cryptic and you're probably going to be pissed at me. But you need to learn to be poetically critical.
Poetically critical.
And I just like scribbled that on the wall and thought about it and had it on the wall for the whole time I was in that studio.
He didn't explain.
School.
He did.
Well,
did
I mean,
he walk
we had
out?
some subsequent conversations,
okay.
but in that moment, he was like,
walked out.
"I'm just going to let you sit with that."
I would have punched him in his stomach.
But that, that's still in my head.
Yeah.
And with not everything I make succeeds to be that, or not necessarily that I'm always chasing that, but I'm always like, okay, well, are you introducing something new? Are you, even
Is
if
that the poetry?
It's still in conversation. I think at that time too, I was trying to be too literal.
Yep.
And I had to find a way to for me, I think the discovery was letting the material communicate, right? Letting the paint do the work, right? In the way that it's put down in that technical narrative.
Yep.
That's part of it. Instead of trying to weave this actual narrative together, because that just didn't suit me. Some people can do that. Some people can make narrative or allegorical paintings, or for me, I ground myself in the material and how that can be expressive or communicate a particular sentiment or feeling or critique of something in the world. I don't know if I strayed from the initial question.
No, it's fine. It was really beautiful. Really beautiful. Ultimately, you say to me often, ultimately, this is about putting paint down on the canvas, right? Like, that's all this is. It's really good. Casey, thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I just want to give a little bit of a shout out for so you teach. By the way, if anyone's interested in art lessons from the beginner student to quite advanced, you have some actual advanced painters that are selling and showing under your tutelage. How can someone contact you?
You can find me online. The website is caseyinchstudio.com.
Great.
Or on Instagram at caseyinchstudio.
Very good.
Yeah, feel free to reach out. So the teaching typically is one-on-one, like you and I do.
Right.
In some cases, it's more almost mentorship. It's more discussion and critique based.
Right.
But I also love working with beginners.
Yeah. Are you doing group classes as well? Are you available for group classes?
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, great. Very good. And then if someone wanted to buy a print or a painting, how would someone go about doing that? CaseyInch.com?
Yeah, CaseyInchStudio.com.
Oh, yeah, CaseyInchStudio.com?
Yeah. You can purchase things online through the website if you're interested. I do sell prints of the work. Some open edition, some limited edition, and then, of course, original paintings and drawings as well.
Casey, I sometimes, I don't know if I expressed this enough to you, but I'm so grateful. Like, I don't know how I did it. Like, I Googled like private art lessons. You were the first one. And I don't do anything like that in my life. Like, I don't like close my eyes and put my finger on the phone book and go, that's the guy. But like, I don't know. It like just was there. And then this beautiful, like profound relationship has manifested. And I'm so grateful for it and you and all that I've learned and all that you've just been there. And it's amazing. You're an amazing guy.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for you too. And the fact that we've been working together for 7-8 years blows my mind.
We got plenty more left.
Well, we're still going, man.
I think there's another couple of Keith Richards paintings in us. Love you, buddy. Thank you.
Love you too, man.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Gentle Art Podcast. Please share, rate, and review. And if you have any questions or you'd like to reach out, please contact us at the GentleArtPodcast@gmail.com or contact us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter or thegentleartpodcast.com.